They're talking about a revolution. It sounds like a whisper.
Hello and welcome to another show of Citizens for Progress. Boy, it's nice to not have to wear a mask. Things are starting to get back to normal. Today's show is going to be about protecting democracy. What's going on in the United States government and the state of New Hampshire in regards to our democracy. I'd like to introduce a guest here, Brian. Brian, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, Rick. Great to be with you again. My name is Brian Beal. I am Deputy Director of Open Democracy and Open Democracy Action. We're based up in Concord, and we've been around for a while. We were founded, Open Democracy was founded by Granny D. Haddock. If you remember, she walked across the United States for campaign finance reform, and we carry on her legacy for campaign finance, for voting rights, the freedom to vote, and also redistricting. We've been doing a lot of work on redistricting and gerrymandering over the last couple of years with independent redistricting commissions and trying to make sure we have a fair process.
Okay, so if people wanted to know more, they could go to Open Democracy Action and search that.
Yeah, we have two places to go, actually, Rick. So opendemocracyaction.org is kind of the legislative, the things that we're doing to pass bills in the New Hampshire State House, but also on the federal level. And then we have opendemocracynh.org, which is the educational end. We have a lot of resources about some of the things we're going to talk about at opendemocracynh.org.
So every 10 years we have a census, and the result of the census causes redistricting. And one of the things that both parties have done when they're in power is to use that redistricting to dilute the other party's vote. So it's actually the citizens' vote is being diluted, regardless of what party. And that's what gerrymandering is. And you've been working real hard on this. Can you update us what's going on?
Well, there's a few things happening here. So this goes, we're fighting so hard because it was a very unfair process back in 2011. The legislature is the one that does the redistricting, and they have a special committee called the Special Committee on Redistricting. This is made up of legislators, and this year it has 8 Republicans and 7 Democrats. And the last time the maps were drawn in kind of the back room, and the legislators, even the legislators on that committee, didn't really have a whole lot to do with it. There were some people who drew the maps and then pushed them through because of the majority at the time was like 17-3 or something that they had. And so they kind of quickly did this without letting the public or the legislators really understand what those maps were. What we ended up with was a map that was very gerrymandered, where it took voters of one party and packed them into a particular area with the map with lines drawn around it, so that all of one party would be in one district, and leaving the other districts to be more of another party. And in what ended up happening was that even though the vote totals of the two main parties in New Hampshire were very close, it ended up putting a finger on the scale, and so more people were elected than they should have been relative to the way that people have voted in the past.
Yeah, you shared a map with me with the seats of the Executive Council, where District 2 starts like in Portsmouth and runs up the New Hampshire-Maine border, then it cuts across the central part of the state, and then it goes down the Vermont-New Hampshire border, and it looks kind of like a snake. It looks like they had to work real hard at that.
Exactly, and that's what we're trying to avoid this time. And voters don't have a lot of power in this, other than how the election came out last November. So we are trying to avoid that whole like backroom thing, and try to make sure that this committee, as they should, as a public legislative committee, do everything in front of the public's eye.
And you're requesting that by town warrant articles and city resolutions that are basically saying we want fair redistricting and we want transparent. We want to be able to take part of that process. We don't want this done in a back room where we don't know what's going on, and the next thing we know, it's done and over with. We want to be able to have input as citizens.
Exactly right. And not only done and over with, but we have to live with that for 10 years. So it better be right, that is going to affect our daily lives for a long time, because this is going to determine in the 2022 elections whether or not the voters are being accurately represented. So what we've done is we've taken this. New Hampshire has this allowance in our Constitution for a petitioned warrant article. So you can gather some signatures in a town that has a town meeting, and you can put a warrant article on the town warrant. So we did this in 80 plus towns, and there were some done last year in 2020. And already this New Hampshire resolution for fair, nonpartisan redistricting has passed as of this the weekend of June 5th, had passed in 70 towns around New Hampshire, with 5 losses over the last 2-year period. So overwhelmingly, New Hampshire voters want to see that there is a fair, nonpartisan, and transparent system. It's the legislators who are playing games with your vote. And that is what we're trying to put pressure on those legislators, so that if they play this hanky-panky in the legislature and try and do the backroom stuff and not let anybody see it, that they're going to pay a price for that, because that's not what the people want.
The warrant articles are for towns in smaller locations, whereas the resolution is for cities that have aldermen or mayor or a town manager. That's
town council, yes. So we have several of those that have already passed. That has passed in Keene, Lebanon, in Somersworth, Dover, Durham, Franklin, Nashua. There may be 1 or 2 other ones that I've forgotten, and we haven't done it in Manchester. And we
that's
really
for
want to get
all
it
my
going
watches
in
out there. We need to get this done in Manchester so we have fair and transparent redistricting. So,
and remember, the cities have to redistrict too. Yeah.
So, Brian, there's several pieces of legislation earlier. I believe it was Monday. The civil rights organizations had a meeting in regards to bills that they're really concerned about. And there was 2 bills in particular that had to do with voting. Can you describe that? HR1, S1 was one of them?
Yeah, it's kind of complicated, because there is HR1, which is on the U.S. House side, and S1, which is on the U.S. Senate side, and they're for the moment they're identical. But then there have been some modifications made to the Senate side by the Senate Rules Committee, and they haven't been adopted yet. But we're hoping that that's the one. HR1 has passed the U.S. House, so that's good. We're happy about that, but it's stuck in the Senate. And S1 is, because of the close 50-50 count in the Senate, it's the filibuster, which is that funky rule that says that in order to end The filibuster, you have to have 60 votes. So all it takes is for a senator or a staffer of a senator to send an email and say, hey, we're going to filibuster that. We don't want that to go forward. So even if you don't have enough votes, you can still stop a piece of legislation. Now, we at Open Democracy, we think that is fundamentally anti-democratic. That if you've got the votes, if you've got in this case, 51 votes, because the vice president would break the tie. If you've got the votes, you should be able to do it. Now, it cuts both ways, right? Depending on who's in charge, who's in power.
So they also call this For the People Act, too. You might hear it referred to as that as well.
That is right. And you may have seen some ads on television or on social media about this. And I'll tell you that some of the stuff that's coming out on broadcast television and in social media is absolute bunk. They are making stuff up because they're really afraid of what the For the People Act will do. It's got these components. It will set a basic level of election access to elections for the whole country. So you won't see these bad voter bills that you're seeing in Florida and Texas and in Georgia. And I'll also tell you in New Hampshire. And New Hampshire has some that didn't make it through the legislature yet, but are just as bad as what's going on in Texas and Georgia. So don't fool yourself that New Hampshire isn't one of those voter suppression states, because it could be, and unless we speak up. So that's why we want to get HR 1, the For the People Act, passed. So it does campaign finance reform. It makes the dark money groups actually tell who their donors are. Wow, wouldn't that be a change?
You mean we don't have the best government money can buy anymore? We'll actually get to see who's buying it?
Wouldn't that, it will be a sea change in our democracy if we can make the people's voice equal to that of any corporation. Because right now we're getting drowned out by dark money. This also has ethics reform in it. So it has all three branches of the federal government requires some really stringent ethics rules, so that people can't be, our legislators, but also federal employees can't be out there enriching themselves or doing favors for their buddies. I mean, that's not what they're there for, right? We want a clean, responsive government. Somebody that's responsive to the people. And then it also has HR 1, S1, For the People Act also has election day as a holiday. One big thing we've been hearing about in these ads is voter IDs are not going to be required. Well, that's nonsense. Voter IDs is going to essentially, for the whole country, be what New Hampshire already has, which is you go in to vote. If you forgot your ID, you can still fill out a qualified voter affidavit and vote. But there's consequences to that. They'll follow up. The Attorney General's office will follow up with you, make sure that you did in fact have that stuff. But it's not like it's being portrayed as nobody has to use an ID or whatever. It's nonsense. Don't listen to it. And what it will do is it will help the disabled, the poor, or just somebody who just forgot their license or maybe had their wallet stolen. I mean, to be able to vote. Isn't that what elections are supposed to be for, or to allow eligible people to vote? So the S1 is it's the biggest, most important piece of democracy legislation in 50 years.
Yeah, we don't have the time on this show to dig into it well, but we can provide the watchers with, if you go to my YouTube, we'll have in the description links so you can do your own research. I saw that New Hampshire made the national news in regards to voting rights, along with those other states you mentioned, Florida, Georgia, and Arizona. And they added a Senate Bill 89, basically. So what are we going to, if this bill passed, we're going to have two elections? We're going to have a local election and then a federal election? because they're saying we don't have to follow those rules?
Well, as you know, there are, Richard, this is going to be a mess. So SB 89 is a New Hampshire Senate bill that said, well, we don't, if the For the People Act on the federal level gets passed, that New Hampshire's not going to follow any of the rules in its elections. So the result of that is that New Hampshire would have to, when they ran an election, have one ballot and one voter checklist and a separate absentee ballot for the state and county elections, and then a completely separate system for the federal offices, for Congress, for Senate, and for President of the United States. Can you imagine the cost and the chaos that would ensue if that gets through? Now, just to also, I'll tell you, this is going to get challenged in the courts because there's the federal supremacy clause in our Constitution that basically says if the feds come down with a rule that theirs is going to supersede anything the state does. But one of the reasons for this is the states have been doing the gerrymandering. They've been doing the voter suppression. They can't necessarily be trusted to do it right. If the states were behaving themselves, there wouldn't be a need for this federal legislation.
We go from there. The next, the HR 4, these bills together provide a lot of protections in regards to our voting rights. Can you describe that?
Well, I think, Richard, that you mean the HR 4 John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. So it's the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. It has not yet passed in the House, and so the Senate's not going to see it probably until fall, is what we're hearing. So what this does, you remember that in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, there were places like Alabama and Mississippi that had a tradition of voter suppression. And the feds stepped in and said, from now on, you can't pass a law in Mississippi on voting and elections unless we say it's okay, because you've played too many games with people's voting rights, particularly Black and brown communities. And so there were provisions in this that were used all into the 70s, 80s, 90s, and the 2000s, early 2000s, where the states had to go and they had to get permission, called pre-clearance. Then in 2013, that law got challenged. I might, ask you who you might think would have challenged those rules. And the Supreme Court, a conservative Supreme Court, agreed that, and they rolled back some of those provisions. The John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act is going to restore some of those rules. So they were rules before. They're codifying them in law this time. And so we think that this is going to also keep where in states where there are large African American and Hispanic populations, will keep states from trying to keep those populations from voting.
So what I've seen on the national news in regards to the civil rights organizations, this was the Voting Rights Act that got passed 64, 65. Johnson was the president at the time. And their concern is if we don't get these two bills, the For the People's Act and the John Lewis bill, HR 4, passed, that we're actually going to be going backwards in time to prior to 64 or 65, when we were starting to guarantee all the people to be able to vote and have their votes counted. So a lot of this is over 389 state legislative bills filed to suppress the vote, and 48 states that are doing this. I mean, there was no problem with voter fraud. It's less than 1%. I mean, here in New Hampshire, it's got to be way less than 1%.
And interestingly, Richard, most of these bills came from a group called the Heritage Action Foundation, part of the Heritage Foundation, which this is a conservative group that pushed out all of these model bills for legislators to use around the country. So don't tell me this wasn't a coordinated effort here. This was, in fact, a coordinated effort to get these bills passed. And it's really about keeping certain communities out of the polls so that they can maintain power over a long period of time. Power is a drug, and they want to, they definitely want to keep it.
So the next event you have is gerrymandering. What's going on?
So we have something called the Map-a-Thon that is citizen drawn maps. So if we can't trust the state to draw fair maps, we're gonna draw our own. Darn it! So we have a group of we had over 100 people participate in this last meeting last month, and on June 22nd at 6 o'clock p.m. We are going to be doing our second stage of that, and you can find that at opendemocracynh.org/Mapathon, Mapathon, all lowercase.
And you're also asking people to call the governor to support fair and transparent redistricting.
Exactly. So the governor, of course, is going to have the final yay or nay on this, right? If the maps that the state does pass the House and Senate, goes to the governor for him to sign or to veto. And the governor has said that he will oppose maps that are gerrymandered. His interpretation of gerrymandering is a little different than ours. He missed a lot of stuff in the map, but we would like him to be true to his word and to veto those maps if they're gerrymandered. And we expect that we're going to see those this fall. So call the governor. It's 603-271-2121, and make sure that he knows that you want to see fair maps.
And you're also hoping that people will contact their federal legislators as well, being Chris Pappas and Annie Custer, and there's a phone number for them as well?
Exactly. For S1, this is the one that you got to do right away. You need to call your U.S. Senators, Maggie Hassan and Jeanne Shaheen, and that number is 888-453-3211. And you ask for one senator or the other, and you can leave a message, or you might get somebody in the office and tell them that you want them to, not only that you want them to support S1, but that you want them to end the filibuster and get this done, because this is going to matter big time in the next, in the next election.
Yeah, so I did want to mention something on the filibuster, though, because that was the bipartisan committee that was agreed to by Republicans. They got everything they wanted, and they still voted against it, and that wasn't able to move forward. That was a vote of 55-34 in support of it, and it still lost. I mean, how the hell can we get anything passed at all? And that filibuster has only been used this way for like little more than about the past decade. I mean, it almost never got used 20 years or more ago.
And we were talking about voter suppression. This was developed to protect southern states and they used a states' rights argument at the time, but it's nonsense. Not undemocratic.
So you did want to give the phone number for the House representatives as well, and that's supporting filibuster in HR 4?
Not the filibuster in that case, but HR 4 for sure. So in the House, 202-224-3121 for Chris Pappas and for Annie Custer, our U.S. representatives. HR 4 is going to be coming to them shortly, so we want them to make sure that they support that. I think they will, but you still got to call them and let them know that you care about this.
And you have a local event going on. You're calling that the Bucket Brigade. And tell us about that.
So this is an event. We're starting to do in-person events again. There's a group of activists from Derry and Londonderry who are going to be gathering, and other folks are welcome to this as well. It's going to be at 2 Litchfield Road in Londonderry on June 23rd at 5:30, an outdoor event, and yours truly is speaking. And I'm going to have my fire buckets all set up. And we've got the HR1 bucket, the voting rights and voter suppression bucket, and we have the redistricting bucket. And we need you to be part of that bucket brigade, because democracy is a dumpster fire right now because of all these bad voter bills. And we want the bucket brigade to help us put that fire out, and let's get democracy back where it should be. So we'd love for you to attend that if you're able.
Democracy and voting shouldn't be a partisan issue. We shouldn't be going backwards. We should make it as easy as possible for people to vote and for their votes to be counted. So if you want to protect democracy and make sure that your vote counts, please join Open Democracy or Open Democracy Action. We're at bi-weekly meetings right now, so every 2 weeks there's a meeting of the different demographic areas of the state. I usually participate with the Southern group.
And we have North Country, we have Upper Valley, Monadnock, Central, and Seacoast.
Well, I want to thank you all at home. I mean, I'm hoping that you decide to take action and get a hold of the Granny D organization, Open Democracy and Open Democracy Action, and participate in protecting our democracy, because no one else is going to do it. And I thank you. I hope you enjoyed this show, and I hope you join us and take action. Take care, be well, be safe.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.